What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about patch 14.23. This is the penultimate patch of the year. We're going to 24, and then I'm pretty sure next one is 15.1, so we are basically nearing the end of the live balance cycle. Probably have some meaningful changes start of the year. We'll see what comes to that when that all happens. Regardless, we're here to talk to you about light systems changes and live balance for the most part coming into patch 14.23. Okay, so topics. I want to explore how the Swain work went of 0.21 and the follow-up balance work of 0.22, as well as talk about some of the larger champion topics like Ambessa, who came out recently, Aurora, Smolder, Rel, as well as an update to bounties. Most of these were covered in a video a few days ago on the channel. If you want the in-depth look at those, just look at that channel instead. This is a small update on what's happened since then. We're making some tweaks to ranged attack damage items, and we are otherwise doing pretty much live balance on a slew of different champions. Okay, so this is a basically paste of data from comparing 12.20 Swain to 12.22, which is the current live patch. I don't know why I said 12 point, it's 14 point. Don't worry about it. I saw the 22 and my brain said 2s and whatever. Obviously, it's 14.20 to 14.22. Don't worry about it. So obviously, the numbers are already on your screen, but the mid pick rate has almost tripled. It is still climbing by day, and comparing to 2 patches ago, win rate is, in fact, actually a little bit lower. Now, of course, there's a reasonable argument for with a pick rate tripling, there's a pretty good chance some novice Swains are showing up and bringing the win rate down. That is a very real possibility. That said, we are not seeing obvious win rate loss with, like, by day. We basically, like, one thing I kind of want to point, how do I want to say this? In general, when champions receive direct balance changes, you don't tend to see huge effects of novices and mains coming in and leaving. This tends to be a pretty subdued effect overall, just tends to be true, compared to other styles of things, such as, it's actually going to be Faker twice in a row, Faker's Azir last year at Worlds, and Faker's Galio this year at Worlds, both of which 2x or 3x the pick rate of those champions, and those did, in fact, see a drop in win rate of those champions. Azir especially, because Azir is actually really, really hard, and people are like, I'm going to go try Azir out in ranked for the first time and suck at it. Whereas, generally speaking, buffs to a champion does not suddenly flood in a bunch of first-timers, it floods in churned Swain players who used to enjoy playing Swain and then stopped. Unsurprisingly, the largest flow in pick rate is Swain mid and Swain top. You know, the role he used to exist in, had a real player base in. The churned Swain players all came back to play Swain. Bot lane now is becoming flavor of the month. People are aware that bot lane Swain is really, really good, but you can see that, like, especially in the early days of the patch, actually had the smallest surge in play rate. In fact, there was no bot lane Swain surge in play rate in the 0.20 update, whereas we did see that in mid and support and top lane. It decayed. People realized, oh, this champ sucks, and so then we buffed him for good reason. But that's sort of what's here is like, oh, and the play rate is skyrocketing. Players are now aware that Swain bot is very, very good. He had been very, very good for a while, and now they're aware, and so he is catching on as flavor of the month. This is kind of the only role where we would actually see some kind of decay from non-Swain players coming in, because for the most part, these are, I'm sort of postulating here a little bit, churn Swain players. Now, I can actually test this if I want to. I can go in and be like, okay, show me the distribution of, like, champ mastery players in patch 0.19 and 0.20 and 0.21 and 0.22. And if it's like, actually, the only increase we saw was in mastery 1 Swains, okay, then I'll take it back. And I'll be like, you know what? If I have the time to do that, I will. Stuff's going on, otherwise I'm busy. But I would bet pretty strongly it is not, except maybe in bot lane, a surge of Mastery 0 Swain players bringing win rates down. Because the other point here is that this is not people flooding over to Swain just because we've just overbuffed him. Now, I would argue, I've mentioned this earlier, that I don't think win rates are a completely fair indication of champion power, because simple agency over your own results is champion power, and isn't always reflected in win rate. A good example of this is Kog'Maw from 3 patches ago versus Ezreal from 3 patches ago. I bet you most people would say that Ezreal was a stronger champion, felt better to play, had more control of the game, even though Kog'Maw's win rates were higher. don't want to spend too much time here. It's a pretty belabored topic, but the reason I'm talking about this is win rates actually have gone down in every single role, especially the ones that most needed it, such as Swain bot lane. Swain bot is down almost 2% win rate from about 55 to about 53. That's still very, very high, but hey, when your champ has a sub 1% pick rate, people tend to ignore win rates. But what's cool is that because mid has become more popular and the pick rate is actually growing by day, as of right now, the mid lane pick rate is finally above the bot lane pick rate for Swain, which is pretty cool. Again, support Swain, pretty reasonable pick rate increase, and it's stabilized. Okay, he's a a much better feeling version, but in all these cases, right, the win rate is actually down. Now, is he actually less powerful? I'm not going to say that, but he clearly feels a whole lot better to play, and we didn't bribe him with pure win rate. So we bribed him with, or bribed, whatever. We gave him power or gave him kit updates that feel better than just win rate, because in every single role he's ever been played in, he is more popular despite winning fewer games. And that's a sign of success, and so I'm very happy about that. Will we have to tune him more over time? Almost certainly yes, but pretty good start as far as I'm concerned. So here is just a real quick run through of small things that were changed compared to last video. So again, if you want to go in depth around what's going on with Aurora and Smolder and Rel and bounties, there's a prior video on my channel. You can go look for it in my channel page. But Ambessa, we are not giving her any real raw balance changes. There's some light bug fixing, QOL, things like that. But generally speaking, now I don't think this is like a 100-0. How do I want to say this? I think you could make a case for nerfing Ambessa this patch. I think you can make a case for not nerfing Ambessa this patch. I don't think you can make a case for buffing Ambessa this patch. Ultimately, we decided not to give direct nerfs to Ambessa. I think, and I thought this from day 2 of her coming out, but I still think this now, that she is long-term overpowered. Now, there's... I still stand by the fact that I think when we first ship a champion, they should be long-term overpowered, and that 40% win rate Ambessa day 1 is completely reasonable. Now, maybe it actually should have been 38% day 1 or something. You can make the argument. Of course, her win rate climbing by day. Of course, it's slowing down, but it is still climbing. There's an argument that in a week's time, we won't be happy with how Ambessa is performing in the live game. Again, that argument is valid. If you believe we should have been nerfing Ambessa already. That said, we're not doing it. Her win rates are, of course, not above 50%, and they probably won't be until several days in the next patch, if even at all. That depends on the rate at which win rate slows down. And her ban rate's actually going down by day. Of course, people had their spike of like, it's new champion, ban it instantly, but it has been steadily trickling down as players are getting better at Ambessa, and so they're actually, Ambessa's pick rate is actually increasing, partially because, again, the ban rate's going down, but Ambessa is getting, is winning more games, getting picked more, and the ban rate's going down. Now, again, it's going down from like 55%. I'm not claiming that Ambessa is going to go to 0% ban rate. I don't think she will. I think she's going to have, probably Darius-like ban rates, probably long term. I would expect that to be kind of true, although we'll see. She's right now not tuned to be a lane bully. She's actually, at least using player data, scales with game time, though that's obviously indicative of like, well, if you really, really griefed your lane and lost in 15 minutes, you forfeited, and there's a survivorship bias there. So this is not an apples to apples comparison of winner by game time compared to other top laners. Ambessa is a brand new champion, so of course it's different. So we'll have to see, much longer term, how this actually looks long term. But regardless, again, though I think you can make a case that Ambessa should be nerfed, we are choosing to keep her in her current balance state for the next patch. Anyway, moving on. Aurora has some slightly different changes compared to last patch. The primary one is the W reset is back. The cooldown change and reset mechanics are no longer any different here. There is still no move speed on passive. It's on W instead. The R change is still there. Q and E doing more damage. Or sorry, Q doing more damage. Q and E having more range. Q having slightly longer cooldown. Those are all still there. But the change to W's mechanics has been pulled back. Okay. Smolder, very, very minor change. I went back and re-added, though to a smaller number, the infinite stack scaling of the burn on his passive. This is now mostly for flavor. The numbers here are quite weak overall. You will generally not get a lot of extra true damage from getting a lot of more stacks. This was intentional. Obviously, there's a lot of important field considerations around Smolder feeling good about getting stacks over time and feeling more powerful and being an infinite scaler. And of course, that has to be balanced, sort of held in opposition to the fact that pro games go longer and pro players are better at stacking. And so while I don't think it's actually very hard to tune Smolder for like low elo versus high elo, because better players but faster games is nicely counterbalancing, that is not the case for pro players, where you have better players and longer games. And it was a trade-off of like, well, you can keep Smolder and he'll be this like very boring pro champion and he'll be underpowered, or He's going to trade off a little bit of his champion fantasy, but hopefully can be tuned to an appropriate level for a much, much larger number of players. And it's entirely possible that I still got this wrong, and I got the trade-offs wrong. Of course, if his tuning is off, we fix the next patch. We give him some numbers. It's not going to be that hard. And if I really brick the champion, then I will do my best to learn from it and make different changes. And, the goal still, right, the ultimate goal here is the two of it is make Smolder essentially more popular via allowing him to have a more appropriate power level, because it sucks to get pro jailed and no one wants their champion pro jailed. And two, when Smolder is in pro play, don't make those games boring. And the primary win there is, in fact, the wave clear nerfs. I chose to also go for more mechanics that were really pro skewed, such as his infinite scaling, but it's possible that we should have like only done wave clear and nothing else, and it could have been a smaller list, and we'll see. Anyway, again, just reiterating that some of the infinite scaling is back. It's just nerfed compared to live. And then as far as rel and bounties, nothing new compared to the last video. If you want to check out what was going on with those changes, watch through the video. Alrighty, we are making some pretty small changes to ranged attack damage items. Youmuu's Ghostblade is being nerfed for ranged users only, so it is the out-of-combat moose being nerfed from 20 to 10 for ranged only, and the duration of the actives being nerfed from 6 seconds to 4 for ranged users only. So if you are playing Kha'Zix, or Zed, or Qiyana, this item is entirely unchanged. If you're playing Graves or whatever, it's different, right? So the basic thing to bring up is Youmuu's is, I don't think it's not currently anyway, overtaking ranged users. It is Graves' most common purchase, and it has like a 25% pick rate or so on champions like Misfortune, and a couple of other AD caster style AD carries. Like it's around, it exists. And ultimately, it having one core ranged user is not a huge deal to me. I don't think it's a huge problem. The difficulty, and the reason we're doing a change here, is ultimately that we think it is probably OP long-term, and players will further move over and catch on. And so that could be a bit of an issue. Also, Youmuu's in particular gives a lot of mobility, and being fast in combat is something that we should be very careful at handing out. We gave it to Assassins because Assassins are supposed to be very, very mobile. That is not meant to be the case for AD carries unless it's in the kit itself. And so a MF or a Jhin or whatever are running even faster than we expect them to because they have this really strong active or whatever is the kind of thing that can break down counterplay. And also, the other core user in Graves, we would really rather he be much more of a sustained champion. You think about what True Grit is promising to do, about his auto attack pattern. Graves should not be doing one-shot burst, and of course we buffed his crit over time. We can do more here, absolutely, but anyway, Graves we think is probably not really best served as pure lethality assassin. I wouldn't say we've done a ton of work on, like, I don't think someone's like made a declaration of like, here are the 7 items Graves is meant to build, but in terms of like the quality of League of Legends gameplay being as high as it can, Graves being a burst assassin is probably not aligned with that. And so again, are there probably other Graves changes to make long term? Absolutely. One thing I do want to call out though is because Youmuu's and Collector both being nerfed, we understand that Graves is okay, not Skarner. Skarner's number 1, but Graves is arguably like top 3 junglers in the game right now. And well, 2 items that he builds basically every game, Youmuu's and Collector is pretty much his core build. They're both being nerfed, and so though we're not nerfing Graves directly, we are nerfing Graves very strongly indirectly. Not by like a huge amount of win rate, but like he's clearly getting double nerfed here, and so, that's fine. We are aware that Graves is getting direct nerfed. Anyway, the reason that there's Collector and Yuntal changes here is Yuntal shipped. We're pretty happy with the shape. We're happy with the design of the item. We're happy with the players who it seems to have courted. It is just simply weak. Yuntal is pretty meaningfully weak. It is very clearly weaker than the other AD carry items, so it's being buffed by 100 gold. The cooldown on the attack speed active is being decreased from 40 seconds to 30, and the duration of the attack speed active is being increased from 4 seconds to 6. I know I've seen people be like, wow, you can chain this infinitely. And it's like, you can, good luck with that one. Good luck actually having infinite uptime on auto-attacking with high crit chance with like maybe Hurricane in some cases. And it's like, if you do, good for you. Honestly, the entire point of this item and its set of users is infinite auto-attack DPS, right? It is like the core point of being a crit AD carry is that you just right-click them forever. And if this item is really good and that you just right-click them forever situation, sounds good to me. Like that is the entire ethos of this set of champions. That sounds like a feature more than a bug, basically. Of course, right, the texture of uptime and downtime is still relevant. 6 seconds on, 24 seconds off is not that. Now, of course, as you attack minions, it's going to come back, sure, but you still have to go and fight enemy champion for that to happen. So, look, if the downtime is actually too low and the experience here is that Yuntal is like, it's always up and they always outtrade me, okay, right, we take a step back, we understand what we want to peel out, we want to give back, That's fine, but ultimately Yuntal very clearly too weak, and Collector is slightly too strong. Like in isolation, we would never have done just the Collector nerf because this is so trivial, so small. Like this wouldn't be worth the line if it was done by itself. But Collector right now is the single most built item in League of Legends, like most built legendary item in League of Legends. I'm sure potions win, but who cares? That's not the fair comparison point. Collector is the most built item in League of Legends, and considering that like that doesn't align with what I think makes sense here. Like, of course, it being a starter item means it's completed way more often than something like IE. Like, IE has more users than Collector, but not all games get to Infinity Edge because some games end at one item, or they were going to get IE third because they bought something else instead or whatever, right? So there's a bias in the data because they slot one item. Also, there's a bias in the data because there's only actually 2 crit AD carry items, because Collector and Essence Reaver is just more niche than Collector. Also, people just rather buy burst damage than Mana Restore. We also haven't really mana gated a bunch of AD carries the way that we've told all the mages that you either, maybe you can find a way to play Storm Surge X, or you're just going Ludens, or whatever else. Like, we haven't really told AD carries you're buying mana. That's an entirely different thing. I'm going off topic a bit here. ER is going to be pretty niche until we say that champions must buy mana, and so you must buy this item or a mana mune or something like that. Again, we could make that call, but not happening here. Could in the long term, though. Regardless, Collector, very light nerf by 50 gold. It is overperforming, but only by a very, very small amount. And then Yuntal, of course, a much more significant buff here. We hope... I don't have full expectations here. I don't think this does everything we need to say like Aphelios. I think Aphelios is still absolutely tied to Collector. Now, a lot of players have gone and tried Yuntal Aphelios, and the power disparity will be closer here, but now that we actually have a core like auto attack item that Aphelios players can buy, I believe we can pretty reasonably tune Aphelios to have an equally viable Collector playstyle and Yuntal playstyle. And if you'd rather play Caster Aphelios, you can. If you want to play auto attack carry Aphelios, you can. This risks him running into pro problems, but Aphelios is one of those champions where him having a high pro presence is probably a positive for the champion overall and for his audience. And I don't think, top of my head, that he's going to be a pro jail problem with this happening. We'll see, though, of course, but that's kind of the way we're moving. Is like, maybe we can have our cake and eat it too, and let him have a caster build, which I know a lot of players like, and an auto attack build, which I know a lot of players seem to want, with the fact that we're seeing, we see plenty of players actually max W second, and plenty of players are going Yuntal on him. So that'll be, one of the hopes here. So that's the system changes. That's kind of it, basically. Again, bounties are in another video. Let's talk about buffs and adjustments. Azir, of course, we gave several smaller buffs to in the past. The reason for the other smaller Azir buffs were like, hey, here were Azir nerfs that did not affect his pro presence, that I wasn't happy about taking away. It's like, I don't think this champion needs to have incredibly poor health regen. Like, yeah, he goes Grasp and Fleet sometimes, but like, he's not Warwick or Darius or whatever. Like, he doesn't have actual self-healing on the kit, but I thought it would make an effect on pro play because it would make his lane less safe, and that didn't happen. Even though he was against other ranged champions who could harass him, it didn't have an effect on pro presence. So it was like, well, I'm just going to give you this back because it didn't work. Like, there's no reason to have this weird vestigial nerf that clearly affects win rate and didn't affect pro. That is the easiest road of my life, right? If it had an effect on pro presence, we would have left him there at a different win rate. Again, bringing up the floor a little bit with some base AD, making it a little bit easier to play, solid stuff there. At the end of the day, hey, Azir is still 1 to 1.5% win rate weak, comparing him to other difficult mages, comparing high mastery Azir to other high mastery difficult champions. And though Azir's generic win rate is probably like 46-47% win rates for most players in ranked solo queue, that's only about 1.5% below because most players are not Azir masters. And so this is meant to be just north of about 1% win rate. This should be relatively impactful and should put Azir at balanced. Master Yi, we are giving some small buffs to. He is still a bit high elo skewed. He wins more in high elo than low, which at least flattening out would be nice. So this is not like, this does not make a big adjustment. This does not make him easier to play. This is, hey, 2 things here that I think are valuable, though I don't think we're going to hit both very cleanly. Late game buffs are low elo skewed, so we are buffing rank 2 and 3 of the ultimate attack speed by 10 and then 20%. So this should, in general, buff low elo mastery more and gives him more high damage threat, more I kill you really, really fast threat, which is a positive overall. The other thing is, I think we are very far from Crit Yi being good, but the more free attack speed he gets, right, the more like functionally base stats this champion gets, those are things that multiply every single stat on Infinity Edge. Now, I don't think IE Master Yi is very close to Rageblade Master Yi in power level right now. But I would like to nudge it that way because, I mean, me personally, someone who's played League for 15 years, I kind of miss Phantom Dancer Infinity Edge Master Yi. Like, that was fun. I did enjoy critting people. And not that, like, we're going to go do a big, like, Master Yi kit update, but it would be nice to bring this back because this was something it used to do. And like he does, for example, like have very, very poor base stats to like give room to his E. And that's meaning he has to go and stack attack speed and go on hit damage because all of his power is in just like, well, can you empower your E as much as possible? And I would, again, I don't think we're going to do any like big kit updates here, but if I could snap my fingers and it would be perfectly balanced, I would love to find a Master Yi who could like build crit and it was like at least comparable. Next change here is Misfortune. Very small stuff here. We're just buffing Misfortune Q. This was, I don't know, kind of arbitrary. I mentioned earlier that like we could try to make more AD carries while Essence Reaver. MF builds Essence Reaver in like 5% of games, so we could try to find some other way to make her build this item more often. I think it would be thematically reasonable on her, right? AD, crit, haste, sounds like things you'd want. But at the end of the day, going kind of the other direction here, which is just, hey, interacting with your opponents with Q is pretty cool. It's relatively skill intensive. There's some cool thought process here with what's going on. So here's a buff to Misfortune, and you can go press Q more often, either to help you last hit, try to ask your opponents, but like here's some landing phase basically, and just overall lower resource constraints. We don't tend to tax AD carries resource constraints very much. Also with noting that some of her most common items, I think her first and third most common slot 1 items are Collector and Yomu's. She's still gonna have Bloodthirster, it's gonna be at the same power level, and BT is as good as those 2 other items. So MF can just move to BT, she's gonna be totally fine. She's gonna have a cheaper Q. She'll be overall buffed as long as people don't grief their builds too hard. Rammus is getting a very small buff here. He's a little bit weak, sure, we're going to buff him, and we're buffing his rank 1 through 4 Q cooldown. It's not a very exciting buff, I understand that. It's just a very simple thing. It takes very little time to implement. This is one of these, like, you know, very small scope reactive balance changes to make him basically more disruptive, more mobile. I remember seeing a comment like, this is not going to affect his first clear. It's like, yeah, cool, you're not learning Q until level 2 anyway, it's fine. This is not about like, oh boy, my first clear is fast. This is like, hey, you have a 4-second cooldown buff on a primary crowd control tool with a meaningful slow and meaningful knockup attached and decent damage. And what's interesting is actually there are a lot of Rammus players who don't max Q first. A significant portion of Rammus players max W first, and it's actually comparable. It's within 1% win rate. And now the incentive to max Q has gone down, which means that Ball Curl max Rammus might be close to optimal, which I think is reasonable. I think that is Ball Curl and Powerball to me are the 2 like thematic spells. What I mean by that is not that taunting is not thematic to Rammus. What I mean is that it's the kind of spell that people can imagine themselves maxing and feeling good about. Like Rocket Jump is a pretty iconic Tristana spell. No one thinks they max Rocket Jump, even though that spell is very iconic. Ball Curl is iconic to Rammus, and I think it's taunt. I mean, I think really Q, W, and E are all pretty iconic to Rammus. Maybe I'm wrong about that one, but like nobody thinks they're supposed to max E. It actually is not even that bad. It's the funny thing. But this actually allows the players who think they can max W, which is actually, again, supported by win rate as decent. This will be better. So like those players get a strict buff until level 13. And then in other cases, he's, you know, going to be pretty happy with just, hey, even if you are maxing Q, levels 2 through 8, you're going to get more of them for fighting some random other champion or doing some other kind of thing. So it's strict power. It's, again, pretty minor stuff, and it has an impact. Rengar is getting a damage increase during his ultimate. There's a good chance this has a very, very small amount of win rate impact. But one thing that Rengar unfortunately kind of lacks is strong counterplay. Unwinding that in a meaningful way would be very, very hard. I can't promise it's going to be like any medium or large scale Rengar changes anytime soon. But oftentimes a head Rengar kills you in literally 0.00 seconds. And I know that experience is not great. Ultimately, the change here is giving some more damage to the R, and this mechanic requires, by the way, going for the champion closest to Rengar. The closest champion to Rengar is always the one that's marked. That's a champion who takes bonus damage when leaps at them. That's a champion whose armor is shredded when Rengar leaps at them. The cool thing is, this has, and then one other thing about Rengar is not only very hard, which elite skews him because elite players have played more League of Legends than non-elite players, but 2, even accounting for mastery, Rengar is actually also elite skewed. So Rengar double dips elite skew here from being difficult and being innately elite skewed. And the nice thing is, R is a spell with counterplay. It's arguably the only spell that Rengar has that has counterplay. That's not quite fair. I don't want to like overblow. I'm not trying to like hate on Rengar here. But it is the one of the most telegraphed counterplay to where like, oh, a Braum player can realize, and it's, you know, imagine the hit rate of a Masters Braum tanking Rengar R versus the hit rate of like a Bronze Braum tanking Rengar R, right? It's like way higher for the higher elo sport player who's like, oh, I understand how Rengar's kit works. I can understand the counterplay and it can do that. I think there is a lot of validity in Rengar R being a larger determinant in whether or not he can kill his opponent. because it allows that counterplay for Rengar to scale with his opponent, because like pretty much nothing he does is dodgeable, right? If you're a good Rengar player, E is flying out while you're in flight and everything's landing. Like the entire kit hits you in 0.1 seconds, basically. So a very minor thing here. Okay, cool. Again, it's meant to be win rate positive. We are intending to buff Rengar, and we're hoping to buff him in ways that higher skilled players can play around a bit better. And the other thing is we're making an adjustment to Jinx. This is the one like small scope buff plus nerf this patch. Yuntal Wild Arrows came out. It is Jinx's most common first item now immediately, because that's what Jinx players want to do. They want to auto attack people. That's awesome. That's great. It's a good item design. Shout out to the designer who did the upgrade, the update to the item. He did a great job. This is meant to be a power shift on Jinx, because we know she's probably going to gain win rate on net from the Yuntal update. That is totally fine, by the way. I think Jinx can pretty comfortably usually live at around 51 and change % win rate. She is very, very simple to play, and also has really strong counterplay. For how common Jinx is and how relatively successful she has basically no ban rate almost ever. Because even when she is very, very popular and appears to be dominating the metagame, she still has very strong access to counterplay from her opponents. And so it's the kind of champion that's like almost like the poster child for like allowed to be kind of high win rate in when we talked about, you know, taxes and subsidies from a prior video. Anyway, this is a simple power shift away from spells towards auto attacking. Now, what's interesting is because W is a total AD ratio spell, AD growth actually rebuffs W. That said, the total power of Zap is going down via an AD ratio nerf. The total power of auto attacks is up more than Zap is down via having more base AD. Generally speaking, just going to be the math here. This is a champion who really wants to build Hurricane. She wants to build a pure AS item in her build somewhere, and so the more that she can be able to eat that by just getting attack damage from leveling up, the better off we are in that regard. So yeah, a simple shift away from spell damage toward auto attack damage. At the end of the day, I'll spend a little bit of time here on the idea of alternate builds and alternate roles and whatnot. So there's two things here. One, I continue to see hyperbole, which is always kind of frustrating from the community, where they'll say things like, wow, I guess alt builds just aren't allowed to be viable, or Riot nerfs an alt build anytime it shows up. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with Tahm Kench, where it's like, well, why do you think Tahm Kench has AP ratios? So that you can build ability power on Tahm Kench. We retuned them if they're overpowered. And like, it always frustrates me seeing the like just platitudes about it. I find the lack of nuance always to be very, very frustrating. Anyway, so this one is like a bit more targeted though, which is like, hey, we in fact are unabashedly nerfing lethality Jinx. Like, I think if we had actually a good caster Jinx build, we'd be fine supporting caster Jinx. I don't think only Zap and Rocket is a good enough kit to support lethality Jinx as a playstyle. Whereas AD carry Jinx, where Zap and Chompers are utility aspects that have some damage, but are largely around adding gameplay and some nuance around what's going on, things that can be missed, things that can be dodged, but she also right-clicks you for, you know, about 2/3 of her damage. That's much more reasonable, and is a full kit that, again, suffers like no ban rate, even when she's very strong. To try to put a finer point on it, when the gameplay quality is low, we'll tend to nerf things. And that can be just the thing is overpowered, or wow, the gameplay of this really sucks. So we'll talk about some nerfs here. We are nerfing Caitlyn straight up. Our last buffs to Caitlyn Q overshot her a little bit, which is fine. Caitlyn at 50.5 or so is totally reasonable. Like, Caitlyn is not really breaking the bank here in terms of win rate, but we are seeing a steady climb in win rate. Pick rate. That's fine. What we are seeing though is a really, really large climb in ban rate, and it's reaching points where we would nerf just for ban rate itself, even if it wasn't a win rate thing. Caitlyn is still a little bit OP. And so we're basically lightly double tapping Caitlyn here. We think these are very small. Again, collector nerf by 50 gold is going to be pretty much imperceptible in terms of like actual win rate impact. It's just too small to like really be a huge deal. So the other change is just we are nerfing Caitlyn's R bonus AD ratio from, I think it's from 1.5 to 1 or like 1.25 to 1. Now keep in mind that, so I have a pretty strong internal rubric for like how much ultimates should scale, because to me, ultimates should scale less sharply on average, not in all cases, but on average should scale less sharply than basic spells, because they're not up very often. And, you know, if it's this 2-minute long cooldown, it means like, oh, when it's up, I just one-shot you from head and gold. And if it's not up, you know, the gameplay is more fair. Whereas if it doesn't scale that sharply, it's like, well, you know, that you try to have one-shot territory a bit less often, whatever. Anyway, random point worth noting that, like, technically Caitlyn's AD ratio compared to base damage here is going to be very, very low. But of course, the asterisk here is that, well, she has another gold scaler, which is a crit ratio, and that, you know, letting her scale this when she builds an RFC or Hurricane or whatever is intended. So Caitlyn's ult still scales pretty well with golds, even though I'm nerfing the gold scaling here. It's still probably one of the better gold scaling ults in the game right now. And then what it comes down to is Caitlyn R should deal more damage than most ultimates because it's unreliable, right? It's single target, a lot of ults are AoE. It is targeted, asterisk. It is blockable, which means it gets blocked by Braum a fair bit and then doesn't deal, you know, meaningful amount of damage. Yeah, it can't miss, but again, it can be blocked, which matters. And because it's channeled, it can't be cast in a team fight the same way that like Jinx R or Ezreal R can. And so there's a lot of other situations here, a lot of other considerations here where it's like, you know, this is just not the same spell as Syndra R, where Syndra R is not blockable and it's castable during combat and whatever else. And I'll bet you that, yeah, in many cases, Caitlyn R deals more damage to Syndra R. Because it's not the same spell, even though it's a single target, I deal exactly one damage, you know, I deal damage to exactly you. So Caitlyn R should still deal high damage, and it's going to, I believe it'll still be worth channeling for and deal good damage, whatnot, but Caitlyn as I chunk you out from range with no interaction, that part is going down. This is why we're taking this as the nerf. Caitlyn, I think having some combos and some spell layering is all totally fine. I think she should be more castery than, say, Jinx, but she is still much more of an auto attacker than, say, Samira or I'm blanking on another one that's a good example here, but like Lucian, right? Like Caitlyn should much more be the crit auto attacker champion than those other ones, and so we want to nudge her on that direction and make sure that she's you know, pretty largely an auto attacker, which means we're nerfing spells. Kha'Zix is, I think, one of the very best junglers in the game right now. He seemed to really enjoy the move speed focused Yomus. Okay, cool. Taking a pretty meaningful swing at Kha'Zix. Kha'Zix has been, I would say, an A tier jungler or better for a very, very, very long time. I don't believe this puts Kha'Zix like subpar. He might be slightly sub 50. Okay. You know, if it's an overnerf, like we'll walk something back, that's fine. You know, not a problem with that. But like, okay, Kha'Zix has been eaten good for quite a while, and so this is a, like, you know, one of the larger nerfs this patch. So taking his armor down by 4, this puts him at 32 base armor, which is still quite high. It's quite high for an assassin. Of course, he has to jungle, but jungling has gotten easy over time, and so he doesn't need nearly as much armor as junglers used to need 8 years ago in order to jungle well, so it's not going to be a problem. His W heals and whatnot should be fine. But basically this is saying that, hey, you're an assassin, you're high risk, high reward. And so this means your risk is going up. You are, you know, squishier more often. Other people can fight you back. But hey, Kha'Zix players, we didn't nerf your damage. If you want to kill people, you still can. We didn't do anything there, right? So I think that's reasonable, right? Nerfing the kinds of things that Kha'Zix players will be willing to lose and should be fine overall. Other change is the isolated slow on W. 38% slow for 2 seconds is kind of feels like an eternity and is a little bit expectation breaking, a little bit higher than I think this champion needs to have. I think it is cool that Kha'Zix has some kind of fallback pattern. He's having a bad game. Okay, I'm going to throw out W's and I'm just going to do something with that. And it actually has a pretty good base damage. It has a pretty good AD ratio. It's almost the same AD ratio as a Q, at least non-isolated Q. And he has a bit of a CC, whatever, and if they jump on him, he can heal and run away. Like, I think having a combat pattern, a fallback pattern is good, right? There's some amount of fallback pattern that is good to have. Anyway, the point is the degree to which Kha'Zix just completely shuts you down when you're chasing him, and he's like, that's cute, I W'd you, I'm always gone here, feels a little too high, so that's going down. Basically, what has also come down to is that this is by far his most common second evolve, and so it's somewhat crowding out his evolve space. And so, hey, here, it's a bit weaker, a bit more room to go for the E or the R instead second. Kog'Maw. So Kog'Maw has had his pick and ban rate absolutely skyrocket off the discovery of AP Kog'Maw bot lane. And so AD Kog'Maw, I think, is overtuned. Like, AD Kog'Maw has been 53 for a while. And now Kog'Maw is actually fairly easy to play. So Kog'Maw 51 plus is going to be expected. That's going to be normal on just mastery data. Kog'Maw approaching maybe 52 because he's unpopular and subsidizing his win rate by being unpopular. I can buy that too. This is also partially why Neela is like 53 and change. Also, some of this is like the strengths feel unsatisfying. That can also be a reason why, compared to, say, like Yone or Lee Sin or Ezreal, where the strengths are very, very satisfying. And with some 50% win rates, they still feel great to play. Kog'Maw, AP Kog'Maw in bot lane, has incredibly poor gameplay. AP Kog'Maw bot lane does not have an extreme lack of agency, or in this case, an extreme lack of popularity. AP Kog'Maw bot lane kind of can't lose lane because he one-shots the wave always and is not the kind of champ that should be 53. AD Kog'Maw, again, I think should be close to 52, and so there are nerfs that also affect on-hit Kog'Maw here. But these nerfs are unequivocally aimed toward AP. Now, to be clear, I don't think we're nerfing AP Kog'Maw by 3%. I think we're nerfing AP Kog'Maw by like 1.6, roughly. And so AP Cog will be like 51.5 to 52, and he'll probably still be too good, and we might have to revisit him back in 0.24, or it could be that we hit a really strong wave clear break point and this was like 2.25, and he's still above 50% in bot lane, by the way. And so this is why I wanted to mention the point earlier around like people kind of overblowing changes. It's like, yeah, I don't mind if AP Kog'Maw exists. He's allowed to be a balanced champion. 53 AP Kog'Maw is not a balanced champion, right? Like that's not reasonable. So the changes here are a 5 to 25 damage nerf to E and an AP ratio of 5% nerf to E. If you're playing AD Kog'Maw, this is minus 5 damage on E until level 14. And then I guess you go Rage Blade, so you'll like, the AP ratio matters a little bit for you, but like, whatever, man. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Of course, the AP ratio nerf matters a lot more when you're buying Loon's Nimbus for slot and whatever. So this should pretty meaningfully affect his trading, should pretty meaningfully affect his wave clear, should pretty meaningfully affect the ability for your opponents to then interact with Kog'Maw. The other change is a sort of a power curve adjustment / win rate siphoning change. Q Shred is weaker until rank 5, aka champ level 13. So levels like 2 or 3 through 12, Kog'Maw Q is weaker to the tune of a decent amount less shred. Even AD, so AP Kog'Maw falls off cliff. That champ does not scale at all because he just auto wins lane off one item and then like hopes the game ends in time. Unsurprisingly, lane dominant champions eat ban rate and get a lot of pick rate because you feel good for the entire game basically, even if you would have fallen off. Anyway, the other side though is that even AD Kog'Maw is not the scaler he used to be way back in the day. I think overall, like I think Kog'Maw's kit is too front-loaded and doesn't scale well enough, and there's a lot that we could do to dig into that and make incremental numbers changes that would, I think, make a more fulfilling Kog'Maw experience. That is my belief. Maybe I'm wrong with what I believe, is that I think Kog'Maw is meant to be a better late game carry and not this weird like 1-2 item spike guy. And so part of why I chose these tactics for a Kog'Maw Q was to stretch out his power budget to like wait until a little bit later. So he's not 1 item spike guy, he's like kind of 2 item spike guy, which yeah is still, you know, only like 20 minutes in the game or whatever, but at least we have to wait a little bit longer for level 13 Kog'Maw to like get all that power back. And then hey, now that you're level 13 Kog'Maw, you are 1% armor MR shred better than you used to be, which again is not large, right? This is a nerf. We are lowering the power level of Kog'Maw. Don't make any other, you know, there's no other way to think about this, but it is making that adjustment there. Next up is Shyvana. Shyvana has almost completely recouped the win rate that she lost last time we nerfed her. Unsurprisingly, she is incredibly happy with Spear of Shojin. This item is perfect for her. Last time I made large changes to Shyvana, I buffed her AD ratios a bunch, and from what I can tell from data, though it is much less popular, Shojin Trinity Force AD Shyvana builds are almost as performant as AP Shyvana. So yes, we could do changes that would like nerf Shojin first slot and do other things, but like Shojin is just the perfect item on her. We are trying to maintain AD builds as viable. This item gives every single stat except haste on the ultimate, which she cannot use. So it is just the perfect item on her as a champion. There's just no way around this item is just so perfect on her. And so, hey, okay, we acknowledge it to be true. We're not going to nerf Shojin just because of the champion. We balance the champ around this. That is fine. But her win rate is far too high. Even in relatively higher elo, she's like 51.5 in Emerald Plus, which is like, you know, top 15% or so of all games, and she's still above 50 even there for this traditionally low elo skewed champion. Now, I still want to try to deliver low elo skewed nerfs when I can. There's only so much going on in the kit, of course. So the two nerfs here are Magic's Growth and the AP ratio on E. So the points here are, hey, Shyvana has 5 armor and MR for free at level 1, because that's just on her champ passive. Now, I don't think her passive should be fake. It shouldn't be like, your passive says you have normal base stats. I think that's silly. Now, of course, her passive also says you do bonus damage to dragons, which I actually believe is enough of a passive, but whatever. I'm not going to like nerf her base armor MR just to be like, you have normal base stats, XD. She gets the armor MR, it's fine. I don't think it's a huge problem. It doesn't mean that she has the highest base MR in the game. Whatever. She has one of the highest base armors in the game. Whatever her passive says, you have 5 bonus armor MR. You have 5 bonus armor MR. That's totally okay. What I believe is reasonable, though, is taxing her MR growth is that, hey, by level 18, you no longer have the best base MR in the game. If you wanted that, you should have killed a dragon or two. And I think that is reasonable. Her armor, as it stands right now, is essentially already in that boat where level 18 armor is lower than Juggernaut's like Darius, and I'm probably Alawi, but I only checked Darius. Darius, I think, is like actually the highest. But hey, she doesn't have the highest armor in the game, and she won't have the highest MR in the game at level 18. She gets the start, and she's meant to stack a little bit. I don't think this falls into the category of like really punishing her for having her passive. I don't believe that is true. But ultimately, it's why I believed it was reasonable to dock her MR growth, that like, well, she ends at level 18 as standard melee champion and just kill one dragon in this game by level 18. If you can't do that, what are you doing? And she gets to gain the rest. So I think it's kind of reasonable. And the other just simply like, hey, we're also going to nerf some damage here. Again, AP Shyvana is still outperforming AD Shyvana. This brings it closer together. E is, of course, where a significant portion of her damage comes from. No duh. Ultimately, some damage down, a bit less powerful. Okay. Skarner, of course, is still the best jungler in League of Legends, is my opinion. Of course, we nerfed him since Worlds. We're going to nerf him again right here. I think there is a degree to which we can nerf Skarner's damage too much. I want to maintain Skarner's durability. I want to maintain Skarner's crowd control profile overall. He is a tank more than he's a Juggernaut, though I do want to maintain that Juggernaut identity best I can. Skarner should maintain the tank things, such as sustained threat. If you ignore him, he will eventually kill you. You can't walk past tanks. That can be crowd control. That can be damage. It often is both. And the ability to build a Sterix gauge and feel good about building, bonus attack damage. That's still there. It's on the queue. This feels good. But still tapering down some damage from Skarner. The other thing I want to bring up here, though, is the high amount of gold scaling on Skarner is really, really on purpose. I think I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again. Using informed solo queue data, Skarner is the strongest tank in the jungle, and that was reflected in pro play. And when you compare to Maokai, Maokai is the weakest tank in solo queue jungle and was still a top 3 jungle pick in pro play for tank jungles for like the entire year. The only time that wasn't true was when he had like really good AP builds, and it was like, actually, you go Liandry's Red Smite and you feel kind of good about this and you actually have gold scaling. That was the only time that Maokai solo queue power and pro play power lined up. I am pretty confident now, looking at just a lot of changes over the years by trying to make this pro play dance work. Gold scaling tank jungles seem to be the silver bullet for being pro jailed. Like, Skarner is OP in pro and solo queue. Maokai is OP in pro play and trash in solo queue. The difference? Skarner scales with gold really hard. And so that is, I think, the needle to thread for most of these things. Of course, Skarner dealing a lot of damage building full tank can be expectation breaking, and is a very valid point. He's not quite Dr. Mundo. Dr. Mundo does not have the disruption potential that Skarner has. Dr. Mundo is actually a Juggernaut. He is a Juggernaut who builds full tank. Skarner is a tank 70%, Juggernaut 30%, who builds full tank or Juggernaut items. And what this is doing, by the way, is allowing us to say, well, of course, Heartsteel is kind of a damage item. Like, it literally deals damage. That's part of what it does. And Sterix Gauge, is actually a damage item. And allowing solo queue Skarner players to go build Sterix Gauge and feel good about it and build a damage item and be threatening and be a Juggernaut is great and working as intended. And if we can get that balance of he has enough gold scaling to not get pro jailed and not be the, poster child for low econ tank jungle, while giving him the right amount of power to, not crush solo queue games and be appropriately picked in pro play, then great. I know I spent a really long time on a 1% HP ratio nerf, but that's why it's happening. Tahm Kench is, if you actually look at his data, Riftmaker, the win rate for Riftmaker on Tahm Kench is astronomical. If you want Freelo, Heartsteel Riftmaker Tahm Kench, it is shattered. It is so good. It is very, very, very OP. And so this is an AP ratio per bonus health nerf to the passive and a flat AP ratio nerf to the shield on the R. Yeah, this champion is incredibly, incredibly OP. You just don't know about it, I guess. This champ is shattered on the right build. Teemo is just getting a simple nerf to the E monster mod. We have a free lever here. Not much to say. Teemo jungle has shot up in popularity. It is very performant. It is quite strong. It's a pretty simple nerf here. Just want to bring in the power level because this champ doesn't need an inflated win rate in jungle overall. And then there's a Zac nerf here. I am hoping that this Zac nerf is top lane skewed. It is a hypothesis that his Q is a larger portion of his power budget in top lane compared to jungle, where he's just spamming W for clear. And obviously, jungle Zac can't miss his Q, but also his clear is coming from a lot of other things, and the Q is not that important. Whereas, because he's spamming W and grabbing blobs and all that things, in top lane, that is not the same. And Zac is, I think, using Q as a larger portion of his power budget. So I'm hoping this nerf is top lane skewed. Zac top lane is doing too well. Worth noting that Zac is in pretty much all in both top and jungle, low MMR skewed. Again, he's overperforming in top lane. And my belief is that Zac Q is top lane skewed. My belief is that by nerfing the total HP ratio on the Q, that is a level scaling thing. That is a late game thing. It will slightly skew towards low elo as well. That would be ideal. Let's hope. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's sort of my belief of what's going on here. End of the day, we'll see what comes out, but that is a pretty much direct Zac nerf. And that's the patch. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.